You're listening to Overdoing It, the Rhode Island Library podcast. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Overdoing It, where our team of library workers dish about their latest reads, views, and passions alongside fascinating conversations with local luminaries. I am your host, Emily Goodman of the Office of Library and Information Services, and also your programming chair for Reading Across Rhode Island, and my pronouns are she, her. Let's dive in and discover who our guest is today.
Dolen Perkins-Valdez.
In a little while, we'll talk to Dolen about her book, Happy Land, which is the selection for the 2026 Reading Across Rhode Island title. But before we do that, we'll start off as we always do with what have you been reading recently?
So right now I'm reading The Seven Daughters of Dupree by Nikisha Elise Williams, which is this wonderful multi-generational novel of 7 generations of women. And there is I think she calls it a malediction where the women only have girl children. So I'm really loving that. It's a debut novel and she's so talented. And it's got, it's historical fiction all the way to contemporary times. It's just really good.
Cool. Do you read historical fiction? I know that's primarily what you write, but is that also like what your reading interests are?
They are now. I've gone through my stages just like everybody else. I used to read a lot of thrillers. I've gone through a speculative fiction phase. I still and always will love literary fiction. But right now I do read a lot of historical fiction, partially because it's just what I want to be doing. I feel like I want to be learning something about history right now. Just in these times, history is calling to me. I want to get out of this contemporary moment. So history is an escape. And also, I happen to have a lot of friends that write historical fiction, and I always want to read their books.
That's a great reason to read. I've been reading Edward Ashton's newest book, After the Fall, which is a science fiction futuristic story about a world in which here on Earth we've been invaded by aliens or some other extraterrestrial life force, and now humans are sort of the lowest faction of society. They're held as either what some people refer to as pets or bondsmen, and so they're owned or lorded over by this class of being called the Greys, and it centers this one particular human and his Grey they have like a close relationship, which is abnormal. And the Grey is trying to establish himself in his society and builds this little compound where he plans to basically run a wilderness camp for elite people who will pay him money. But he's put up the bond of his human as collateral. And so they're wading through this challenge in their relationship, as well as confronting sort of what it means to be a society of different groups of people with different classes and things like that. So it's been really interesting. I'm only about a third of the way through so far, so a lot of pieces still to fit together.
I love how those futuristic stories can really speak to the past and vice versa. But yeah, that is fascinating. That sounds good.
Yeah, it is good. I know Dave, who's, for our listeners, who's producing for me today and is on the call in the background, does a lot of science fiction, and he's sort of suggested a few to me that's really gotten me into the genre as of late. So as you're talking about going through seasons of different genres right now, sci-fi seems to be one that's pulling me a lot.
Love that. And shouldn't we just follow that? Like,
Yeah.
I think for a long time I resisted that. I thought I had to read a certain type of book. And now, thankfully, I'm at that time in my life where I just read wherever the spirit calls,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. And I'm glad to have this moment, because I think for a long time I thought of myself as somebody who didn't read science fiction. Like, people would say that they read science fiction and fantasy, and I'd be like, oh, that's cool. That's not me. And now I'm like, oh, it can be me. Maybe that's not always me. And maybe I'm, in more of the contemporary or the lighter stuff rather than the high fantasy. But yeah, we don't have to be one genre or not a genre. We can be anything and everything.
I love it.
So have you been watching anything particularly good recently?
Well, my daughter's in college, and her English class recently watched Moonlight, that 2016 Barry
Mm.
Jenkins movie. And I hadn't seen Moonlight really since it came out. And she had never seen it. And she called me one night and she said, "Why didn't you ever show me Moonlight? This is one of the greatest films." And I realized, like, I forgot, sometimes it's one of those, it's more of a mature film, and your
Hmm.
kids cross over from being too young to being old enough overnight. And so I think it just slipped my radar because when that movie came out, I think she was only maybe 8 years old.
Hmm.
So I rewatched it, and it is just as beautiful as it was when I first saw it. I mean, that ending, the ending, I remember being blown away by it when I first saw it. And this time I rewinded it and I watched that ending like 5 times. One of the greatest cinematic scenes in that diner ever.
I think I missed that one. I feel like when I was working in libraries at the time, because I'm now at a state agency, but I was working in a public library, and I know that I showed it as one of our events, but I can't pull it to memory, so I'm going to have to go and watch it now.
Oh, you must. You
Yeah.
must. It is so tender. It is so vulnerable and beautiful. And it is filled with all kinds of symbolism. And the scenes are very, very subtle and nuanced. It just
Mm.
beautiful filmmaking. What about you?
Yeah. I've been catching up on Bridgerton. So I just finished season 3. And I had watched the first 2 seasons sort of when they were a big deal. And then I got to season 3, and for some reason I watched the first episode and I was like, I think I'm done with this. So I took a break for a little while, but with everybody talking about season 4 coming out, and now with all the talk of season 5, which I'm now very excited about, I've been rewatching that. So I'm making my way through Bridgerton, which is a lot
Love
of
that.
fun. Yeah.
Yes. I love Bridgerton.
Yeah. Did you also watch, is it Queen Charlotte, the sort of spin-off of the Queen's
I
perspective?
never watched Queen Charlotte because I okay, I philosophically have a difference with whether or not she was Black.
Mm.
And years ago, someone had written me about her, and I did the research, and she had a very, very distant war ancestor. And so, this idea that she was somehow categorically Black,
Mm.
um, I always found really historically untrue. There was like one scholar that kept insisting on that, and so now the imagination of the series, I'm fine with that, and
Mm.
I don't have a problem with someone sort of imaginatively portraying her in that way because she was, her features looked very African. She did look African, but to claim it as some kind of history, I'm just enough of a historical purist to want to say like, okay, we need a sort of asterisk on this show.
Mhm.
And so I have not watched it. That's probably more of an answer than you wanted.
More than I was looking for, but I'm really interested in that because I had no idea that that conversation was happening and that it was based on any amount of, I'll put it in air quotes, real historical information about Queen Charlotte's ancestry.
Yes.
And so I thought it was just imaginative. And I thought, this is so cool. I love the idea of presenting royalty as being a Black woman, and all the other like higher positioned people in the community being of different races. And I really loved that aspect of it, but I didn't realize there was any potential truth.
Oh, yes. There's a scholar out there, and it's, pretty much this one person who has been claiming for years that she was Black. And of course, the city of Charlotte, North Carolina, will often make reference to it. I mean, I should say not the
No.
city, but citizens or people of the city of Charlotte, North Carolina, will often make reference to her African ancestry. And I think, that's fine. She did, I think, have a distant North African ancestor, but to sort of reclaim that history that
Mhm.
Queen Charlotte was a Black woman, I think is taking it a little step, it kind of really relies on a kind of one drop type of categorical system that I take issue with.
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like that's a really wonderful and natural segue then into the main part of our conversation to talk about your book, Happy Land, which is a kingdom of a king and queen who are categorically Black, freed Black people. So without giving too much away, I wanted the first question that I ask you about your book to be, for anybody who's listening who hasn't read it yet, how do you describe your book in your own words?
So this is a book that is inspired by the true story of the Kingdom of the Happy Land. It was a community that existed in the hills of Western North Carolina where these recently enslaved people escaped the post-war terror of South Carolina and created their own community. They were self-sufficient. They had a communal treasury. They modeled themselves after royalty. They named a king and a queen. That queen was Luella Bobo, and the first king was William Montgomery. Those were two people that actually existed. And so this book is inspired by their story. And then I fictionalized a contemporary character who learns that Luella is her maternal ancestor for the first time when she's almost 40 years old. And the book asks the question, what does it mean to learn this remarkable story about your family? And what does it mean to your sense of yourself if you learn that your people, who you knew next to nothing about, were actually extraordinary?
And so I'm curious for you, when you found out about this real place, Happy Land, that you modeled your fictionalized version of, what was it like for you to learn about that kingdom?
Well, at first I thought it wasn't true. I said, what kind of local lore is this? Because I could only find evidence of it in these local newspapers, small, very, very small papers. And then I contacted a librarian in Hendersonville, North Carolina. His name is Ronnie Pepper, and he told me that it was true. And he and I began talking and sharing resources during the pandemic before I was finally able to travel down to Hendersonville in 2022. But it to me was the type of story I had never heard of. I knew that there had been Black intentional communities all over the U.S. There were hundreds of them, but I never knew that there was one that modeled itself after African royalty. I thought that was a unique story that needed to be shared. And I was also very interested in this idea of this tiny little pocket of the hills of, Appalachia being something that represented in its highest form the American spirit and the American desire to reinvent itself.
That's really beautiful. And so as the programming chair, and being part of the selection process for this book for this year, that was one thing that really stuck out to me is, this is America 250, and, we're celebrating the history of this country as, declared in 1776, and ignoring all of the previous, history of this land at this point. And thinking about all the vast stories that we don't often hear about or don't get a chance to hear about, that have happened within these 250 years. And I think that was something that really pulled me to this book, being able to celebrate these free Black communities throughout the country that were unfortunately devastated at various points in our history as well. So now they are often just part of history rather than places that we can go and see and revel in today.
Yeah, I mean, anyone who has traveled, okay, so, years ago, I traveled to Egypt and I spent 2 or 3 days just wandering the Egyptian Museum in Cairo and marveling at the antiquity of the artifacts there. And then, of course, if anybody's ever been to Rome, right? Very, very old city. So when you think about American history, we seem like such babies compared to the rest of the world, and again, using that framework you just mentioned of 1776, not taking into account the Americas, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even so, even if we are in our infancy in the scale of things, there are so many still remarkable stories to pluck out of the
Mm-hmm.
American timeline. I mean, there's still so many little nooks and crannies of things that happened here, even since that time. I mean, let alone before that time. But um, this is, to me, a country that has forged a very unique path. For better or for worse, it is a very unique path, unlike anything in the history of the world. And it's worth our attention, it's worth the attention of novelists, it's worth the attention of all artists, poets, painters, dancers, and of course historians, because there are just so many things that we still need to learn about ourselves.
Mm-hmm. And so was there a moment in your research that stands out as like your favorite moment or thing that you discovered in that research?
I think one of the things that I really loved researching was the industriousness of the women in the
Mm.
Happy Land, because they in this, and I'm talking about, I mean, this occurs in the book, but this also occurs in real life. Most of the historical portion of the book is directly from the archive, but the women developed this product known as the Happy Land liniment, which was very commercially successful. I mean, people liked that liniment, some kind of analgesic that they rubbed on their aching, arms and legs and so forth and so on. So they were contributing to the communal treasury. They also, and I don't know if this made it into the book, but the women organized a children's choir that went around and sang for various people, and they were paid for that. They raised money for that. The women they started a school in the kingdom because they believed that all of the kids needed to be educated. There was a chapel. I mean, the women's industriousness was endless, and they were also growing crops and doing all those other sort of traditional things. But in some ways, they were equal to the men in some ways, because the men were hiring themselves out to work in the mines and to build the railroad and stuff. But the women weren't just cooking and sewing, they were also contributing to that treasury. And when it came time for them to buy the property, they put half of the property deed in Robert Montgomery's name, and they put the other half in Luella's name, which was a testament to how much they trusted her with
Mm.
their future and with their money. And this was at a time when it was still very unusual for a deed to be in a woman's name. Even a wife wouldn't be on
Mm.
a deed. So every time I discovered something about those women and just how hard they worked, I just imagined them. In the book, I put them in shawls because I wanted them to look distinctive when people saw them around town, And I just imagined those women deciding, we want a seat on the council, we want to have a say in how this community is organized, and we want to contribute financially.
Mm-hmm.
I love that.
Yeah. I think that your love of that really comes through because they are so prominent in the story of the kingdom, the women sort of powering in some way the success and the forward movement of the kingdom. And so one other thing that's some people and I have been talking about is how full all of those historic characters are, and wondering about how you balanced creating those fictional characters with the real things that you were learning about them, and how much of that maybe did you bring in, or how much of is it really true and from your research?
Well, it's interesting because I'm a both and person. So like on the one hand, I would say like I'm a historical purist. Like I do think there should be a lot of research and there should be a certain degree of accuracy in a good historical novel. It should be real clear to me when I read one that the author has done their work, right? I don't
Mhm.
want, if you're just making the whole thing up and just using some historical era type things, to me that's not really, that's more like historical era fiction. But I want to feel like in the hands of a good historical novelist, like a Kate Quinn, like I
Mhm.
want to feel like I can trust that, a lot of this stuff they're writing, I can take to the bank. But
Yeah.
on the other hand, I'm not a historian, I'm not a journalist, I'm not writing nonfiction. So the imagination must also be a part of that. And in this book, I brought the imagination to the contemporary storyline. And I think the way to get there is to ask a question of the history. What is the question I'm asking? What is the purpose of me even writing this? And I think for me, the question I was asking was, why is this important? Why is this history important? And that's how I came to Nikki, my contemporary character, because I wanted to show that she has been devastated by her lack of knowledge. She's like aimless. She's unsure about things and what to do next, etc. And part of it is that she doesn't know her history. And that history, once she does know it, empowers her to take charge of her life, and it empowers her daughter. So I do feel that, that's the tricky balance of being a
Mhm.
historical novelist, like being faithful to the narrative and also knowing when to depart and when not to depart. I mean, obviously, if you are depicting someone who possibly is still alive or something like that, I always try to do justice to real people and to their
Mhm.
descendants. I have a good friend who's the descendant of Madam C.J. Walker, and I've learned through her that descendants have feelings about how their ancestors are portrayed in these things. That doesn't mean that it has to be all glowing and positive, but there needs to be a certain honesty there.
Mm. And another conversation that I've been having is thinking about how interesting it was that you chose specifically Nikki and her relationship as the granddaughter of Mother Rita, who's still on the land, and not Laurel as her daughter, who kind of went away and then eventually comes back. And so, was it really intentional to skip that generation? And did you have any pull to maybe? Did you think about creating a story from Laurel's perspective versus then Nikki's perspective, and kind of how did you choose how you approached that?
Oh, that's a really good question. It never occurred to me to portray Laurel's perspective because I was sort of thinking of myself as Nikki,
Mm.
someone who, um, you know, is still learning about their family history. Um, and I feel like my mother's generation knew a little bit more because they were, as we say in the South, they were closer to the bone of it.
Mhm.
And so they knew a little bit more because my mother knew my grandmother, right? And I can't remember what year Mother Rita was born, 1920s, if I'm correct. But my own grandmother was born in 1909, and so a lot of things my mother knew that I
Mhm.
don't know. So I really wanted to put a little bit of distance there to just show how the deterioration of knowledge is generational, and the further we get away from, you know, the progenitors, so to speak, the further we get away from those grands and great grands, the less we
Mhm.
know. And that's Nikki for me. She literally knows nothing,
Yeah,
you know, and and that's sad to me. That saddened me. And I think that there are people like her.
absolutely. And then do you have a favorite character?
Well, I always say I love Mother Rita because I love smart, not to be underestimated, but also slightly cranky older women, right? Women who have lost their filter, women who people might look at them and think, oh, you're just a country woman, but she's a reader and she knows the names of things, and she's smart and she might live up there, in the country, but she knows some things. And it's not just because she's sitting and watching TV. She's reading, she's thinking. And there's always been, women like that in my life. And so I think as I get older, I had in my previous book, Take My Hand, I had Mrs. Williams, who's also a bit of an unfiltered grandmotherly type. So I've been thinking about those kind of women lately, maybe because one day that's going to be me. I say that sometimes. That's going to be what me one day, the slightly cranky older woman without a filter. Because, those are the women I love and cherish. I mean, my mother is one of them, and she's hilarious, and she calls it like she sees it, right? And there's a real, as women begin to feel that way, that they can say those things, it's a real liberation in it. But she's very, very loving too. Those women of
Yeah.
that generation were very loving. And Mother Rita, really, her dearest wish is for Nikki to be empowered and to know something. She loves her granddaughter and her great granddaughter, and she wants to gift. She doesn't want to burden them. She wants to give them a gift.
I love that perspective because I think that my late grandmother was very similar, also born in the early 1900s. And likewise, I spent a lot of time with her in her like 80 plus years. And she was a little feisty. And one of the things that I think I loved the most about Mother Rita was she knew things, but she wasn't just going to tell you. She was going to make you figure it out yourself. And my
Yeah.
grandmother was very similar. It was like, I want you to know this information, but I need you to learn it. I need you to struggle through the not knowing to the knowing. And at times, I think that was a little bit frustrating in the book. Like, just tell her why she's there. But there's also something really sweet about getting to that piece of information through an amount of hard work and figuring out rather than just being told something. And I think to the way that you've written the generations, right? Laurel was told the information and didn't believe it. And so without the piece of discovery, it's harder to believe the lore of your family history.
Yes, and I think part of what Mother Rita wants Nikki to do is to fall in love with the
Mm.
land and with the story. And she knows that if she just tells her, that's not enough. And so by making her go into that library and go through that archive, she makes an emotional connection to the history. And I think somehow, and because Mother Rita is, a library person and a reader and a person who lives, very close to the written word, she
Mhm.
understands how going in there and seeing it for herself might change something in her,
Mhm.
and it also keeps her there longer because Mother Rita wants her to stay a little bit longer. I mean, when she first goes down there, she only plans to stay a few days. And so, yeah, I think that's part of it. I think our contemporary, like when we're old and cranky, Emily, God willing, we all get there. Our version of that will be go look online and see, and
Mhm.
then come back and talk to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's Mother Rita's version. She's not saying go Google it, but she is saying go to the computer, go to the library and see for yourself.
Mhm. And get your hands in that dirt, like wander
Yeah.
the property, feel it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was curious, since the book deals a lot with sort of ancestral information and honoring stories and legacies, who is the coolest or weirdest or most interesting person in your own family lineage that you've discovered in your lifetime that you love to talk about or just love to think about?
Oh, well. So I will say my mother and her sisters. My mother's one of five sisters. There are now three left. And I have in my second book, Balm, I have these sisters. I think I've been dealing with these cranky older women a long time, Emily, because I have these three sisters that absolutely adore each other, but also fight all the time.
Mhm.
And that was my mother and her sisters. I wouldn't say they fight all the time, but they have their moments, and but don't you dare get in the middle of it, because if
Mhm.
you do, they'll all sort of turn on you in as one, you know, like they defend each other like wildcats too. But they're so fun to be around. There's always a lot of laughter. Uh, any of the husbands that married those sisters will all tell you they married into this tribe of women. And they have to just deal with that. Um, and and their storytelling, their magnetism, their big, huge personalities really inspire a lot of my creativity.
Mm.
Um, and I just, you know, I can't even imagine being in a family that wasn't a big family. I have like a gazillion cousins because there were also six boys.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, five girls, six boys. So, um, my feeling about it is, family, whether it's blood family or chosen family, just being around a group of people who you love and trust, who accept you for who you are, is a real gift.
Mm.
It's a real gift.
It really is. That's incredible. Did all 11 of those siblings generally live in the same area as they got to be adults? Were you around all of them?
Yeah.
Nice.
Except two of my uncles moved to Chicago, and my mom and one of the sisters also they migrated to Chicago during a Great Migration, but they ended up returning back to Memphis.
Mm.
So Memphis is my home. It's where everybody is. My grandmother's people were from Memphis area, and my grandfather from Mississippi.
Okay.
So we are like dyed in the wool Southerners for sure.
Mhm. That's beautiful. My mom is one of 6, but a lot of
Okay.
them stayed. At least we're all New England based. Some of them moved a little bit further away, but are finding their way back.
Yeah.
Also, and it is really fun to be part of it.
It is fun.
Yeah.
I remember, I don't even remember why, but we had a big family gathering and I was crying. And one of my cousins came in the door. There were so many people. Somebody had made me cry. And my cousin came in the door and she hugged me and she said, Dolen. And then she turned around and she said, who made Dolen cry? And I was like, them. And then she just like hugged me. And like that's what our family's like. Like, we are just like every other family, we're totally messy,
Mhm.
but we also love each other so much. And I do try to capture that in my books. Like, Nikki and Laurel and Mother Rita, there's a lot of dysfunction there. I mean, Laurel hasn't even spoken to her mother in years. There's a lot of silences. There's a lot of wedges in the family. But, we do understand, I hope, as readers, that they do love each other. And I
Mhm.
think that is, I'm always encouraging whenever I talk to people who have wedges in their family, like try to make amends if you can, because, if you can, sometimes you can't.
Mhm.
But it's amazing though when you think about those wedges or families that have these very very deep rifts. Sometimes it's not as serious as you would think, right? It's
Mhm.
about some perceived slight that when someone from the outside hears about it, it feels minor. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes it's not minor, but sometimes it is. And those are the moments where I say, like, see if you can try to repair that.
Yeah, and it's interesting how those things can sort of fester over time. So even if it was
Yes.
kind of minor, right? 5 years of not talking to each other over this small problem now can feel really insurmountable.
Calcifies. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's something in this book I was really also, I think I had some kind of psychological, I think it was maybe Psychology Today, some psychological organization interviewed me and they were asking me these questions about like estrangement in families,
Mhm.
which I hadn't studied or thought about in any kind of scientific or studied way because I'm not a trained psychologist. But I thought it was very, very interesting in how, they were asking these questions and they were saying that, when you are, this is what they told me, when you are estranged from a family member in a similar way that Laurel and Mother Rita are in the book, it can be like a type of death. The pain of that
Mm.
is often sort of worse than it's a very, very painful thing to endure with a particularly with your mother or your daughter, and that struck me as just sad for Laurel,
Yeah.
and by the time, well, I don't know, we can't talk about the end of the book, but but yeah, when y'all read it you'll see what we mean.
Yes. And it's not a sad book. So
So it's not a sad
take
book. It's
that. So just a little bit about, so you're the Reading Across Rhode Island author for 2026. At time of recording, you haven't been to Rhode Island. By the time that we publish this episode, you will have been to Rhode Island for your whirlwind trip to meet with our readers and our educators. And so I was curious if you've been to Rhode Island before, and if not, what are you most excited about maybe seeing? Have you heard anything about the state? And if you have, what are you excited about seeing again?
Well, yes, I was there last year with Reading with Robin,
Oh,
um,
cool.
and the lovely Robin who hosted me and 2 or 3 other authors. And I have also, I used to have friends that went to college in Providence. My daughter, who is a visual artist, my younger one, not the college age one, but
Mhm.
the one who is 11 years old, says that her dream school is RISD. She
Nice.
talks about RISD. Somebody told her this about RISD, and she went online and she looked it up, and her dream school is RISD. So anybody out there listening, look out for Amelia Valdez in 8 years or 7 years. But yeah, so I love the island, and I love my college roommate. They have an inn on Block Island in
Oh,
Rhode Island, and so I recently was just talking to her, Rosalie. But I will say that one of the things that I love when I come there, what are those little crab, I think they're crab or something balls that y'all eat?
The clam cakes.
Clam cakes.
Yeah.
Oh, those are so good. I had never had those before. Give me all the clam cakes.
Yeah, they are very good.
They're so good. And they have like that, right amount of crunch and flavor.
Mhm.
My God, I don't even need any sauce or anything. I just eat them just like,
No? Oh,
mm-mm.
I need a cup of clam chowder, a nice creamy clam chowder to go with it. That for me is
So
perfect.
do you dip it in your clam chowder?
I do.
I see. I didn't even do that. I just ate it. I thought it tasted good, just like it was.
Oh, it does, but if you have a chance to also pair it with some creamy clam chowder,
I'll
that's
try
that's
that.
my preferred way, yeah.
I'm
Very good.
wondering about hot sauce. Does anybody eat it with hot sauce?
I imagine that they do. I'm not a huge hot sauce person, so,
Yeah.
I don't, but I'm sure that they do, and I'm sure it would be absolutely delicious if you like
Yeah.
a bit of spice,
That's what
yeah.
I'm looking forward to. Hopefully somebody
Okay,
puts some in front of me while I'm
okay.
there.
I have people, I can pass that message along. All right. That I think is going to wrap up our main section of our episode. And we're going to turn to the last chapter, which is our final segment where we talk about a library or bookish related question. And so I thought today that I would ask you, thinking about in all of the books or shows or movies that you've seen, who's a fictional character whose story you'd like to see sort of rewritten to get a different ending or a different story arc?
Ooh, a different ending?
Mm-hmm.
I probably can't even think of a character that I would want a different ending for. Because I always like, if I watch the art, I accept the art as it is, and I don't
Mm.
always expect a happy ending, particularly if it's like high art, you
Mhm.
know? Um, and I think even with like historical fiction, and I've often, had some readers tell me with my first novel, Lynch, that, they didn't think it was a happy ending, but I thought it was a hopeful ending. And so I think I'm okay with hopeful endings. They don't have to be happy endings, but hopeful endings inspire me. But I don't think
Mm.
I can think of an ending I would want to change.
I think that's really beautiful, and I love the idea of you accepting art for art because I think that probably the creators want that and don't
Yeah,
want the
I feel like
nitpicking.
I accept I can always criticize, but I don't think I would ever
Mm.
pose a different ending. To me, endings are hard won, and
Mhm.
they're very, very hard to write. And so
Mm.
I try to accept them. And I always think that there's a world beyond the end too.
Mm.
That may be another reason why.
That's beautiful. I'm not going to sully that with my own answer because I think that is a beautiful ending and sentiment. So thank you so much, Dolen, for joining us today and blessing us with this conversation. I'm very excited for everybody to meet you who comes to the author event in April, though that will not be relevant when we publish this episode. But just between you and me, I'm very excited for that event. So
I'm
thank you so
excited too.
much.
Will I meet you, Emily? Will you be there?
Yes, I will be there.
Perfect. Perfect.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. Dolen Perkins-Valdez book Happy Land is the 2026 Reading Across Rhode Island selection. We invite you to find the book at your local library or bookstore and join us in reading and discussing the book and its themes around the state. For all programming related to Happy Land this year and to find out how you can get involved in this effort for future years, you can visit ribook.org. If you would like to respond to our last chapter question and tell us if there's a character whose ending you'd like to see rewritten, you can reach out to the show to send us an email at overdoingitpod@gmail.com or find us on Instagram at overdoingit. That is overdue, like all of our library books, IT pod. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it with a friend and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or Spotify to help us reach more Rhode Islanders. Overdoing It is proud to be a resident partner of the Rhode Island Center for the Book and is brought to you by library staff and community members all around the Ocean State. The project has been funded in part by the Rhode Island Office of Library and Information Services. Thank you again for listening. This has been another episode of Overdoing It, the Rhode Island Library Podcast. We are overdoing it, but you're doing just fine.